Good morning, folks. And as is our custom, let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for another day. We're one day closer to the return of your Son. And who knows who of us, if not all of us, will be alive and on earth at that time, or will already be with the Lord. In any case, there's a great event ahead, or several events anyway. And we do pray that this will, in its own way, be a special event for each one who is here to hear from you and to be strengthened and encouraged by your presence. Thank you for hearing us now. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, all right. Today, we are going to be digging into Nahum, the seventh of the 12 minor prophets. And so he was included in Jesus' comments to the two followers of Christ on the road to Emmaus, when this is what is said there. Luke 24, beginning at verse 13. Luke 24, verse 13. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. So Luke chapter 24, verse 17, he asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. So Moses, all the prophets, and that included Nahum. All the books that we have in our Bible today, except for, of course, those written in the time of Jesus, all of the Old Testament books were there, available, distributed as the Jews had been dispersed throughout the Mediterranean, all these different towns and cities, including, of course, Judah and the territories of Israel. All of these were in the Old Testament and were brought out and various scrolls brought out in the synagogues Saturday by Saturday, Sabbath by Sabbath. So one of these was Nahum itself. Now, what does the name mean? Well, I thought for fun, if anybody wants to volunteer there over the airwaves or here around the table as to what your name means. Think about it. Do you know what your name means? I was a little bit uneasy about even offering this opportunity because I suppose I should include myself, and I do happen to know what Allan means, but that's not something you have to take notes on. But Allan means hunting dog. It's kind of special in a way. I mean, if you like dogs. Paul, what does your name mean?
So I don't know, other than Saul became Paul.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm assuming there was a deeper meaning to that, as most Hebrew names, right?
Yeah, so maybe that's something you could do a
Research.
little research on.
I
Yeah,
thought you were gonna
yeah.
Spring the punchline.
Okay, anybody here on the distaff side of the table?
Have Google.
Pardon?
Have Google.
Oh, what does Google have to
So
say?
Yvonne means you.
You,
Renowned, one of the longest living, renowned for their strength. The longest living trees in the world. Who knew?
longest?
I guess I'll have to stand still.
Yeah.
So Google, I never knew. Thanks for
Well,
asking.
yes, well, thanks for doing Google. That's good.
I used to know, I can't remember.
I can tell you if you'd like.
Sure.
You're
I know
the
what mine
goddess-
is.
The goddess of the hunt.
I know what mine is.
What is yours, Beverly?
It's from a beaver's menu. But the fruit of the spirit is love, joy, peace, and patience becomes, and all of these such brings there is to love. And it also goes on to say that it's trust in the Lord with all things, heart, and learn not, and lean not unto thy own understanding. So it's from the beaver's meadow, from the beaver's meadow.
The beavers.
Beaver.
I don't know what that means.
Except the fruit of the spirit. What is the fingers?
I don't know.
I'm not even sure what word. Well, anyway, thank you, Bev. It
Oh, that's
sounds
what
like-
all of my cards say, anyway.
Come
Yes,
on,
it
you're wrong.
sounds-
That's what
It
mine
sounds
is.
like it's fairly biblical. That's good.
Lisa has her hand up.
Yeah,
Yes.
Lee has her hand up.
Oh, Lee, what does your name mean?
You're
You're
muted.
muted.
You're
Unmute.
You're muted.
Unmute.
Put your hand up to your ear. Muted now.
You,
You're,
thank you. Please turn on
Sorry.
your,
Yep.
oh, now let's try that over again.
go ahead.
My mother always told me it was God's promise. I
God's.
don't know. I've never looked it up,
Elizabeth. your
but I'm
name is-
satisfied with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. Anybody else who want to volunteer? We don't want to spend too much time on it, but
Mine is
it is
derived from the
interesting.
word divine,
what did I say it was?
goddess of the hunt.
Oh. I kind of like goddess of the hunt. Because hunting dogs and, we kind of go together. That's good.
That's okay. move
All
on.
right, moving right along.
This one does say Paul means smaller.
You're not small.
Do either of those fit you? That's,
Derivative of Paul is this name. Smaller.
Hmm.
Paul was a popular choice among Christians associated with the disciples.
yeah. I wonder if Paul was the disciple, apostle, disciple, whether he was shorter or taller. We don't know anyway. Well, thank you, everybody, for contributing to this little exercise. The word Nahum means comforter, one who comforts. And it's supposed here that at least at the very least, Nahum would have been a comfort to the people of Israel because he devotes the whole book to the slaughter of and destruction of Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria, which was always nipping at the heels of the northern tribes of Israel, and conquered Israel. And that happened in 722 BC. And then later on, Nineveh was destroyed. He was destroyed shortly after the prophecy of Nahum. But the interesting thing is that it was Nineveh, as you'll remember, you students of the book of Jonah, that Jonah was sent to Nineveh to warn Nineveh that God was about to destroy them if they didn't shape up, if they didn't mend their ways. Very immoral society. And they did. And Jonah, of course, was disappointed because Nineveh represented the enemy territory. Didn't want to go there in the first place, as you may recall. He went to Tarshish, which was in the opposite direction, probably a city located in Spain, what is now Spain. The ship was headed for Tarshish. Jonah was not interested in saving Nineveh. Well, here we have the flip side in a way, in Nahum. Nahum is pleased to be able to devote his whole prophecy to Nineveh and its destruction. All right. So that would have been some comfort to the people of Israel in the north, especially, but also in Judah. Nahum's home. Well, there are three candidates for this. I'm not going to go into this detail of scholarship, but it seems most likely that Nahum's hometown, he's an Echoshite. If we will look at chapter 1, verse 1, an oracle concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum, the Elkoshite. So Elkoshite was an area southwest of Jerusalem, about 30-ish miles. And so anyway, that's where he was from, most likely anyway. The date of his prophecy, just so you can sort of pin it down that way in your mind, was around 640 BC. And I try to think of, okay, what would that interval mean? The interval between the time of Christ and the destruction of Nineveh in 640, or the prophecy of Nahum, rather, around 640. And the interval there between Christ and the prophecy of Nahum would have been about the same amount of decades, centuries between the finding of the New World by Columbus and our own date. Pretty much 630, 640 years, so roughly about the same. Anyway, it would have been in the memory to the extent that Columbus is in our memory. It would be definitely an interval of time that would have been comprehended anyway. Now, the focus of this book is Nineveh, as I've said, capital of Assyria, and that would be generally in the area of the country Iraq. So we can place Nineveh, we can place the home of Nahum less. And so we can talk a little bit about Nineveh. Let's look at Nahum chapter 3, verses 8 to 10. And here it is, Nahum, God through Nahum, asking the question, are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? The river was her defense, the waters her wall. Cush, south of Egypt, and Egypt were her boundless strength. Put and Libya were among her allies. So there's some national pacts being established around that time. Verse 10, yet, in spite of these alliances nationally with these other areas and the natural boundaries of the water of the Nile, in spite of this, verse 10, yet she was taken captive, went into exile. Her infants were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her great men were put in chains. And then it goes on to say, you too will become drunk. In the descriptions of the defeat of Thebes, there were these orgies, drunken orgies on the last day of the battle. The troops and everybody else just gave up and got drunk. And that's what's going to happen with Nineveh, according to this here. Okay. So Nahum 3, 8 to 10, comparison to the fall of Thebes under Ashurbanipal. I remember that name from seminary somehow. Ashurbanipal, an exceptionally cruel ruler whose tortures he boasted of and testified and terrified the peoples of the area. And so I thought, well, no, I don't need to inflict that on you, but they were pretty horrible. And they reminded me anyway of what the Nazis did purportedly, among other things, to their enemies, and especially the Jews, was to skin them alive and use their skin as for lampshades. I mean, this was a fact. And this is that kind of thing, not the lampshade part, but the skinning of the enemies of these Assyrian countries and leaders, just terrible. So we'll move on. Nahum 3, verse 11, the prophet promises widespread drunkenness. And see Nahum 1:10 in relation to that. And this is God speaking through Nahum about Nineveh. They will be entangled among thorns and drunk from their wine. They will be consumed like dry stubble, be burnt up. The town, the city was burnt. And then chapter 2, verse 5, we have another reference to the drunkenness here that obtained. Verse 5, he summons his picked troops. This is the ruler of Nineveh. Yet they stumble on their way. They dash to the city wall. A protective shield is put in place. They're not sure, the scholars are not sure what this protective shield was, but it was to protect the people on the wall or behind the wall from arrows and stones and things that the enemy could throw up against them. Okay, let me give you an outline. Chapter 1, a thrilling song, a commentator says, a thrilling song of the coming triumph over Nineveh. That's chapter 1. And then chapter 2, the judgment to be visited upon Nineveh itself. And then 3, the total destruction of the totally depraved city, chapter 3. And it's interesting, the commentators, scholars do acknowledge the fact that it wasn't until the 19th century that people had any idea where the city of Nineveh was. It was just completely destroyed and covered over. And Alexander the Great apparently fought a battle almost right on the location that they finally decided in the 1800s. The scholars decided, oh, that was Nineveh that was located there. So until relatively recent times, there just was no memory at all of the city, just disappeared. All right, Nahum apparently, and I say apparently because I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but apparently it's amazing poetry, rivaling that of Isaiah, who also is known to be recognized as a great poet. But the poetic form here divides 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The divides the book up into 8 pretty much equal sections, numbers of verses. And so we'll look at each of these and then ask some questions about them, just to get some feeling, at least, of this poetic dimension. Chapter 1, verses 2 to 6. And I'd like you to ask ourselves, what historical events are captured in verse 4? All right, well, let's read 2 to 6. Chapter 1. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord takes vengeance and is filled with wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and maintains his wrath against his enemies. And then this statement, which was what God said to Moses when Moses was up on the mountain, wanted to know more about God. God said to Moses, and now says through Nahum to the people of Israel, verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power. And then moves back into this theme of punishment. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His way is in the whirlwind and the storm, and clouds are the dust of his feet. In other words, God is involved in his creation, but in this horrible kind of judgment that he metes out against those who are doing wrong and who basically are attacking his own people. And God had promised to Abraham, those who curse you, I will curse. And those who bless you, I will bless. That was God's promise to Abraham, that as the nations treat you, so I will treat them. And we have the same thought here, but interjected is this sort of softening effect of verse 3, the Lord is slow to anger. In other words, you can't fault God for being impatient and flying off the handle, as it were, with these other nations. He has put up with them for a long time. And coming back to the tyrannical and barbarous treatment that Ashurbanipal and some of the other Assyrian kings meted out to their enemies. It's understandable that God expressed somewhere along the line, eventually, his abhorrence at what was going on. I mean, think of ourselves today and what's going on in the culture. And we say there needs to be accountability. How often have we said that? Nobody is accountable for some of the awful things that are happening. And it was sort of the same idea here. The Lord is holding these nations accountable. He's been very patient. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. And the Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. Some were saying, oh, what difference does it make whether we honor God's directives or not? And that's been a mantra down through the ages. Who's going to tell? What difference does it make? The Lord is slow to anger and great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. And then his way is in the whirlwind. He's close at hand. And some of these, we have heard them called acts of God. Some of these horrible kinds of catastrophes, natural catastrophes, have indeed been part of what God has allowed and even used. All right, so what historical events are captured in verse 4? He rebukes the sea and dries it up. He makes all the rivers run dry. And remember, Nahum's the comforter. And so just by mentioning these things, in terms of what God does, he rebukes the sea and dries it up. The people of Israel should be comforted. Why? Well, they crossed the Red Sea by virtue of God's power and God's directive. Same way with the river coming into the promised land. What river is that? The Jordan River. He makes all the rivers run dry, including the one there, the Jordan. And then Bashan and Carmel wither, and the blossoms of Lebanon fade. These are areas surrounding Israel and Judah that were very fruitful. The cedars of Lebanon, we've heard about them before. And so the fruitfulness, the plenty that's associated with these places, no, Bashan and Carmel wither. The blossoms of Lebanon fade. It's like the blossoms in Washington, D.C. What if they didn't show up one year? That would get people's attention. This gets the people's attention. The blossoms of Lebanon fade. All this is going on. The mountains quake before him and the hills melt away. The mountains quaking reminds us of the large island in Hawaii, where there's been volcanic activity and the rivulets of lava flowing to the sea and so on. It can be very impressive. All right. So we have in verse 4 references to God's powerful hand in delivering his people out of Egypt on the one hand, the sea, and into the promised land across the Jordan on the other hand. All right. So Nahum is saying God hasn't changed. God is slow to anger, but he will not leave the guilty unpunished, like Assyria, for instance. So God has not abandoned you. He's still there. He's still doing things. He's still at work, protecting you and so on. All right, chapter 1, 7 to 12. Oh, here we have another statement about the Lord's character. The Lord is good. Well, that's good to know. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. This goes back to what he's promised Abraham. He cares for those who trust in him. How many times have God's people, ourselves and others, asked the question, well, God, where are you in this? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't seem like you care. Well, here it says, he cares for those who trust in him. But, verse 8, with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end of Nineveh. He will pursue his foe into darkness. The foe of God. Why is Nineveh the foe of God? Because Nineveh is also the foe of God's people. You hurt my children, you're hurting me. This is kind of basically what God is saying. And we can identify with that. Chapter 1, yeah.
Flood is metaphorical.
It is. It's metaphorical here. Yeah. He cares for those who trust in him with an overwhelming flood. Well, we also do know from scholarship that Nineveh itself was surrounded by a large moat, and there was a reservoir there apparently that the enemy could capture and then manipulate so that the water from the reservoir would flood into the city. And this is probably what happened. Okay. What are the images? 7 through 12, chapter 1. So we've talked about the flood. Whatever they plot against the Lord, he will bring to an end. Trouble will not come a second time. They will be entangled among thorns, drunk from their wine. They will be consumed like dry stubble. Verse 11, from you, O Nineveh, has one come forth who plots evil against the Lord and counsels wickedness. And this is what the Lord says in response. Verse 11, although they have allies and are numerous, they will be cut off and pass away. Although I've afflicted you, O Judah, I will afflict you no more. Now I will break their yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. All right, so God is saying, it seems like I've forgotten you, Judah. It's not true. I have not forgotten you, and I will deliver you. Chapter 1, verses 13 to 2:2. Let's look at those verses and ask the question, what is God's promise to Judah? And then who is speaking in chapter 2, verse 1? So here we go, verse 13. Now I will break their yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. Verse 14, the Lord has given a command concerning you, Nineveh. You will have no descendants to bear your name. I will destroy the carved images and cast idols that are in the temple of your gods. I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. That's pretty strong language. You are vile. All right. Look, there on the mountains, the feet of one who brings good news, who proclaims peace. Celebrate your festivals, O Judah, and fulfill your vows. So God is now addressing Judah, wanting to comfort Judah. Celebrate your festivals. Go ahead. Fulfill your vows. No more will the wicked invade you. They will be completely destroyed. So you won't have to worry about this dark cloud of the nation of Assyria north of you. You don't have to worry about that anymore. All right. So then we come to chapter 2, an attacker who just some attacker advances against you, Nineveh. And then it's like somebody in power there in Nineveh barks out these commands. Guard the fortress, watch the road, brace yourselves. Marshal all your strength. All right, it's almost like the FBI or something, moving in on them. Verse 2, the Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob, like the splendor of Israel, though destroyers have laid them waste and have ruined their vines. God is acknowledging this. There have been some difficult times, and you have been overrun as a people, and your properties have been destroyed, ruined their vines. The vineyards were an important part of their economy. So God is going back and forth, saying to Nineveh, look, there's going to be an attacker, and it's going to be totally futile for you to try to do anything about it. Guard the fortress, watch the road, brace yourselves, march, and so on. A pep talk that's not going to do a bit of good. And then God shifts his focus over to Jacob, God's people. In the midst of all this, and I think the impression we need to take from this is that history, which we have here in Nahum and the other books of the Bible, history is a complicated thing, and you have all kinds of forces at play, and you have human nature at its worst. You have human nature also being given a wonderful taste of God's mercies. Slow to anger, I will protect you. If you call on me, you can trust me. I will respond to you. I love you. I will restore your splendor. So that's what we have here. What is God's promise to Judah? Well, protection, deliverance, fruitfulness again. Who is speaking in 2:1? The attacker advances against you, Nineveh. And then guard your fortress, watch the road, and so on and so forth. Who's speaking? Maybe that's the king of Nineveh. Maybe the high priest. Some leader, somebody who's taking charge here and trying to buoy up the sagging spirits of the troops. Do your job, guard the fortress, so on. Okay. Chapter 2, verses 3-8. Notice the contrast between the inside and outside of the city of Nineveh. Inside the walls, outside the walls, all right? Chapter 2, verses 3-8. The shields of his soldiers are red. That his there refers back to the attacker mentioned in chapter 2, verse 1. An attacker advances against you. The shields of his soldiers are red. The warriors are clad in scarlet. The metal on the chariots flashes on the day they are made ready. The spears of pine are brandished. Here you have the power of the military with all its pride, waving its weapons around. And we see pictures of this. Trucks filled with various kinds of peoples, oftentimes people who are, what do you call them? Tyrants, people who are enemies of the peace, people who are riding around with their AK-17s or whatever they are. What is it? 15. Okay. Well, all right. I was probably a little more advanced in my weaponry, but
Sounding like Joe Biden.
Oh, please, no.
all right. None of this is being recorded, I trust. All right. Contrast between the inside and outside of Nineveh. The shields of the soldiers are red and so on. Verse 4, the chariots storm through the streets, rushing back and forth through the squares. They look like flaming torches. They dart about like lightning. Verse 5, he summons his picked troops, yet they stumble on their way. They're too drunk to be able to muster properly. They dash to the city wall. The protective shield is put in place. The river gates are thrown open and the palace collapses. There's archaeological evidence for all of this. It is decreed that the city be exiled and carried away. Its slave girls moan like doves and beat upon their breasts. Nineveh is like a pool, and its water is draining away. Stop, stop, they cry, but no one turns back. So it's a picture of the people just fleeing the city. And we know something in a very small way in our own country of people fleeing from one part of the country to another because they can't stand it anymore for whatever reasons. Okay, contrast between the inside and outside. Outside the city wall, lots of bravado, cheerfulness, just delighting in the possibility of shedding the blood of these Ninevites. And inside the city, this picture of chaos, really. People rushing here and there, trying to man their stations on the walls and so on. All right, chapter 2, verses 9 through 3:1. It's the next poetic section. As if poetry is going to lessen the awfulness of some of the things that are being described as dashing the children. I mean, think of our own national outcry against the 3 children that were shot recently. It's hard to imagine someone coming up to a child and just shooting them. It's pretty hard to imagine some of the things described here in Nahum too. All right, 2, 9 through 3:1. 2:9. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold. The supply is endless. Why is the supply of gold and silver endless in Nineveh? Well, because of all the conquering that the kings of Nineveh and Assyria have meted out in the past against various nations in that part of the world. So they have all kinds of gold and silver there, lots of plunder. Plunder the silver, plunder the gold, supply is endless, the wealth from all its treasures. Then speaking of Nineveh, she is pillaged, plundered, stripped, hearts melt, knees give way, bodies tremble, every face grows pale. All right. Where now is the lion's den, the place where they fed their young, where the lion and lioness went, and the cubs, with nothing to fear. The lion killed enough for his cubs, strangled the prey for his mate, filling his lairs with the kill and his dens with the prey. Where is all that evidence of violent victory that had been a part of the scene in Nineveh? Where is it? Verse 13. I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. I will burn up your chariots in smoke, and the sword will devour your young lions. I will leave you no prey on the earth. The voice of your messengers will no longer be heard. Right. Kind of a sad picture, isn't it, really? Okay, chapter 3, verse 1. Woe to the city of blood. All right, there's violence. It's been a hallmark of the Ninevites in the past. Oh, and full of lies. That sounds familiar. Full of plunder, never without victims. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, glittering spears, many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a harlot alluring, the mistress of sorceries, who enslaved nations by her prostitution and peoples by her witchcraft. I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty. That's what he said before. Hasn't changed his mind. I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. I will pelt you with filth. I will treat you with contempt, make you a spectacle. All right, so that is a description of the shame that attended the profession of prostitute in that world. All right, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit. Chapter 2, 9 and through 3:1. What image do we find in Hebrews 12:2? Well, let's take a look. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. No, verse 12, I'm sorry. Hebrews 12, verse 12. And this is written to believers, Hebrews is. And this chapter follows the chapter on the people of faith in the past and how God had used them, trained them, in some cases, had them killed even. But nevertheless, they were God's people and God was not through with them yet. And chapter 11, verse 39, the last couple of verses there, these were all commended for their faith. All these people mentioned, beginning with Abel and going through Noah, Abraham, and so on. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, believers, in the time after Christ came. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect or complete. All right, now in chapter 12, verse 12, we have this encouragement, thinking of the name of Nahum, encouragement here from the author of Hebrews. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. There it is again. It's become a proverb. A weak-kneed person is a person that doesn't have any gumption at all, won't stand up for what is right, so on. Strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. All right, that was a verse we had here, I believe, in this last passage. What's the verse? Anybody have it? Chapter 2.
You back in there?
Back in Nahum. Thank you. Nahum chapter 2.
Oh.
Here it is, verse 10. All right. And verse 10 says this, she is pillaged, this is the city now, plundered, stripped, hearts melt, knees give way, bodies tremble, every face grows pale. Very descriptive. All right, so some things never change. The people of God in the time of the author of Hebrews experienced the same thing. Fear, trembling, weakness, anxiety. What was Jesus often saying to his disciples? Fear not. Peace be with you, he said after he was raised from the dead. People following him, disciples, were cringing there behind locked doors, wondering when their time for being executed would come. And so here it is. And in our own day, Christians in various places, Christians in the Ukraine, believers there, believers in Russia. We don't often think in those terms, but there are believers who are struggling with serious persecution. And it's beginning to happen in our own country. People losing their jobs over things they've said that were not appreciated by this party or that. Okay, chapter 3, verses 2 to 7. We've read this already, I believe. The crack of whips, the clatter of wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, charging cavalry, flashing swords, glittering spears. Warfare is something that tends not to be super organized. I mean, people organize for the battle, but then the battles come and it's chaos. And that's the picture we have here. Many casualties, piles of dead, bodies without number, people stumbling over the corpses, all because of the wanton lust of a harlot. The harlot stands for the unfaithfulness of God's people. Oftentimes in the prophets, God has spoken of himself as your husband. I am your husband. The whole book of Hosea is built around the theme of God being married to his people. And yet the people of Israel are like Hosea's wife, just unfaithful. And yet God says, take for yourself a woman of harlotries. Take for yourself this woman and be married to her. So, what hinders the reinforcements brought into battle? They're encountering too many bodies that they have to roll their chariots over. The harlot represents probably the chief goddess of Nineveh. What are the dangers represented in these verses? Mistress of sorceries, I am against you, declares the Lord Almighty, and so on. All who see you will flee from you and say Nineveh is ruins. What can anyone where can anyone find comfort? Or where can anyone comfort you? All right. Chapter 3, 8 to 13. It's a similar scene to one in Mark's gospel. What time do we have here?
Yeah, about 5 minutes. Wow.
Couple minutes more. Okay, let's look at the passage in Mark. Chapter 12, beginning at verse 14. Verse 13, later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians, the party of Herod, to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know you're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he said. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin, and he asked them, "Whose portrait is this and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Okay. How is that similar to chapter 3 of Nahum, verses 8 through 13? The mistress of sorceries, the harlot that's representing the city of Nineveh, is alluring the mistress of sorceries, peoples enslaved by her witchcraft, magic, wrong kind of supernaturalism that was playing there in the city streets. And God saying, "I am against you." All right. I'm not quite sure what the connection is there. Anybody see it? A similar scene, Mark 12, chapter 3, 8 through 13. Well, we can leave that for your teacher to figure out for next time. All right, chapter 3, verse 14 through 19. Nahum 3, 14 through 19, and we'll end with this. Draw water for the seed, strengthen your defenses, work the clay, tread the mortar, repair the brickwork. There the fire will devour you, the sword will cut you down, and like grasshoppers consume you. That's God speaking through the prophet again. Multiply like grasshoppers, multiply like locusts. You have increased the number of your merchants till they are more than the stars of the sky, but like locusts, they strip the land and then fly away. Your guards are like locusts, your officials like swarms of locusts. They settle on the walls on a cold day, but when the sun appears, they fly away. No one knows where. So these are extra troops. These are the elite soldiers of Nineveh. They're increasing the number of their forces. Multiply like grasshoppers, multiply like locusts, but they're not to be counted on. When you need them, they're gone. All right. Some thoughts to conclude with here. What from Nineveh, or from Nahum, do we take away from this? God governs in all of this mess of humanity and what humanity does to humanity, and all of that, the faithfulness, the faithlessness of God's people, in all of that, God is still the one who is clearly in control. I don't like this, he says at certain points. Another point, he's slow to anger, but he will hold people who are guilty. He will hold them as guilty. So God governs, God holds people accountable in general, but that includes his own people. Somewhere in the New Testament, it speaks about if God treats the enemies of God with justice, is he not going to also expect justice and righteousness from his people? No, all the more so. And so the New Testament writer says, what a terrible thing it is to fall into the hands of the living God. It's a terrifying thing, because God does hold his people accountable. But at the same time, then there is this promise that comes from God to Abraham and ever since to his people, which is call on me and I will be with you. I care for you, so you can trust me, and so on. So God holds his people accountable, but God's grace triumphs. And so we have all the passages in the Old Testament as well as the New, which remind us that God is merciful to his people. That means he holds his holiness in abeyance and lets his grace triumph over the evil that he's dealing with. And so there's a lot here that's to be of comfort to ourselves. This is the way the world acts so much of the time. History is filled with wars and rumors of wars, and Jesus promises more of them. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you do not change. You are holy God. There is such a thing as truth and falsehood, and you hold to the truth, and you give us your truth. And Lord, help us as your people today, part of your worldwide people. Help us to be comforted by your steadfast love, that your character never changes, that you are slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Lord, help us to count on that and savor that today and taste and see that you are good. We pray it in your Son's name. Amen. Okay.